My ex-wife cheated with my golden child brother, had his baby, and now my family wants money after supporting her during the divorce. I am a 29-year-old man, and I recently went through a divorce with my wife, who is 27 years old. Our marriage ended 2 months ago when I discovered that she had been cheating on me with my estranged brother, who is also 27 years old. I first learned of the affair 4 months ago when she revealed to me that she was pregnant. At first, she tried to convince me that the baby was mine, but the frequent visits from my brother began to raise suspicions. Driven by doubt, I decided to check her phone, and what I found confirmed my worst fears. When I confronted her, she had no choice but to confess that she had been cheating on me with my brother for some time. My relationship with my family had been strained ever since I left home at the age of 18. I had always been treated as an outsider within my own family, while my brother was clearly favored as the golden child. I remember feeling bewildered when they threw a party that was supposed to be in my honor but started without me. When I saw the cake, I lost my composure entirely. I confronted my parents, asking why they hadn't celebrated my actual achievements instead. They responded by saying that after receiving my acceptance letter, they didn't want my brother to feel left out, so they threw the party for him instead. They also said that instead of being upset, I should have been trying to uplift my brother. I was broken by that moment and decided that day not to go back to them, a decision that I have kept to. I managed to put myself through college by taking out loans and working hard, and after graduation, I rented a small apartment with a friend. After moving out for college, I never spoke to my parents again, and they never attempted to reach out to me either. Many years have passed since then. Last year, my brother reached out to me online, expressing a desire to reconnect with me and our parents, claiming that they all missed me. A lot has changed since I left home. About 2 years ago, I married my now ex-wife, and I was living a very comfortable life. However, I realized that I had never truly moved on from what had happened with my parents, so I decided to meet with them. At first the situation was quite uncomfortable, but they were sincerely trying to make amends for their past actions. In return, I felt a sense of duty to reciprocate their efforts. So I invited them to my home, which turned out to be a regrettable decision. Introducing my brother to my ex-wife turned out to be a regrettable decision. They crossed paths, began a romantic relationship, and she became pregnant. I was overjoyed to learn of her pregnancy, as I believed the baby was mine. However, as I previously stated, my brother began coming over more frequently once I discovered I was pregnant. Although it didn't bother me at first, things took a strange turn when he began touching my wife's pregnant stomach and speaking to it. My ex-wife downplayed the situation, but I couldn't help but feel a lingering suspicion that my brother was more involved with the baby than he claimed. After 6 months of pregnancy, I made the difficult decision to check her phone while she was asleep. Unfortunately, my worst fears were confirmed. The text between my ex-wife and my brother provided evidence that it was indeed his child and that they had been in a relationship for a significant period of time. Furthermore, my ex-wife deliberately concealed the fact that the baby was not biologically mine. She and my brother had a secret plan to reveal their affair once the baby arrived. Their intention was for her to leave me and start a relationship with my brother, all while relying on the financial support I would be providing. The following day, I inquired about the messages, and although she initially attempted to deny it, she eventually relented and admitted to it. That marked the conclusion of my 2-year marriage. It's unfortunate that my parents chose to support my brother and ex-wife. It turns out that all their talk about valuing both of us equally was just empty talk. When my ex-wife and brother made their divorce public on social media and shared their plans to get married, my entire family embraced their choice wholeheartedly. No one showed any concern for the damage they had caused to my well-being and the betrayal they had inflicted upon me. Furthermore, my ex-wife had deceived me for half a year by falsely claiming that the baby was mine. It was an incredibly painful experience, as if I had lost not only my wife, but also my child. My parents insisted that this was the right decision and once again refused to acknowledge my brother's wrongdoing. They actually encouraged me to find joy in the newfound happiness of my ex-wife and brother, suggesting that I should participate in the festivities. Once again, I removed them from my life, which also complicated my divorce. It was quite unfortunate that my ex-wife ended up with a significant settlement and my car, mainly due to the support she received from my family during the divorce. Now that she's with my brother, she and her lawyer concocted a tale about me being toxic and controlling, claiming that I forced her to quit her job, despite it being her own decision. My family emphasized that they had cut me off initially due to my negative behavior and disrespectful outbursts. Despite the overwhelming evidence against me and the financial loss I experienced in the divorce, I was fortunate enough to retain ownership of the house. When the divorce was finalized, I felt relieved that I could finally move on and leave behind the negative experiences and people associated with it. Fortunately, There is no delay for a divorce in my jurisdiction, and my ex-spouse did not oppose it either. As a result, I was able to efficiently conclude the process and begin a new chapter in my life. It was challenging to put this behind me, but I immersed myself in my work and pushed myself to improve, allowing me to move on from this unpleasant experience as quickly as possible. It was worth it because I recently received a promotion. I now have a higher position, a better salary, and a company car. Just the basics. I was absolutely thrilled, so I decided to indulge in a solo dinner date at one of my favorite restaurants. However, I made the error of sharing my experience on the internet. Soon after, my mother reached out and requested that I pay them a visit. I was surprised by their sudden interest in me, considering we hadn't communicated since the divorce and they had sided with my ex-wife and her false accusations. I was able to overlook it for a few days, but then she began calling me incessantly, and eventually, as a last resort, she appeared at my office. She adamantly refused to depart and engaged in a heated altercation with the receptionist, resulting in a rather mortifying situation. So, I made a commitment to visit in a few days, which was the key to persuading her to depart. A couple of days after that, I finally made the decision to visit my family. They had used the settlement money to move into a larger house to better accommodate the baby, who had been born just over 3 weeks ago. I suspected that the alimony payments were also being used to cover the household expenses, but honestly, it didn't bother me much since the alimony was a small part of my income at this point, and I could easily afford it. When I arrived, my brother wasn't home, and my ex-wife was asleep, so it was just my parents who were there to speak with me. I didn't bother with any small talk and simply waited for them to get to the point. After about 5 minutes of awkward silence, my father finally blurted out that my brother had been fired from his job, and now the alimony and settlement money weren't enough to cover their expenses anymore. They mentioned seeing my post about my promotion and hoped that I could help them out since they were now running low on money. My parents had retired a long time ago, my brother was out of work, and my ex-wife clearly had no plans to return to the workforce anytime soon. I knew that the alimony wouldn't be sufficient to cover the bills for a family of 5, especially with a newborn in the house. However, I was stunned that they even had the nerve to approach me for help after everything that had transpired. I was so taken aback that I didn't say anything for a few minutes, but eventually, I gathered my thoughts and realized that I didn't need to entertain any of this nonsense. Without a word, I stood up and walked out. As I reached the door and opened it, I found my brother standing outside. My parents urged me to stay and listen to them, and my brother looked a bit startled to see me. I still didn't say anything and continued to leave. It was raining heavily, and the short walk to my car, parked just outside their lawn, left me completely drenched. I was already in a foul mood, and what happened next only made it worse. My brother and dad followed me outside, and while I was fishing around in my pocket for my keys, they made one final, pathetic attempt to ask for assistance. This is when I may have been an asshole. This time, it was my brother who pleaded with me. He had always been smug and arrogant, a direct result of the preferential treatment he received from our parents, so it was odd to see him asking me for anything. It must have been difficult for him to swallow his pride, which made me realize they were truly desperate. Anyway, I ended up losing my temper and told them to leave me alone. I even went as far as saying that if they were truly that desperate for money, they might as well beg on the streets, where a stranger who knew nothing about them would probably have more pity on their situation than I ever would. After that, I got into my car and drove off, leaving them standing there in the rain. I have to admit, there was something satisfying about finally standing up to my family after all the mistreatment I endured throughout my life. Now, it's been 2 days since that incident and I'm starting to question whether I made the right decision. My mother has been texting me non-stop, and I can't shake this nagging guilt for not helping them out. I know I have more than enough, and giving them a bit of money wouldn't really hurt me. But after everything that's happened, it feels like they're just trying to take advantage of me. So am I the one in the wrong for refusing to help my family financially after they sided with my ex during the divorce? Update 1. I ultimately decided not to give them any money. This was a tough decision for me because I felt incredibly guilty about the idea of abandoning them, but then I reminded myself that they had been doing that to me my entire life. Even during the divorce, they were the ones who betrayed me. So why should I hesitate to do the same to them now? I told my mother to stop bothering me, warning her that if she continued, I would have no choice but to get my lawyers involved, and that wouldn't end well for them. Naturally, this didn't sit well with them, and a few days ago, my brother showed up at my house to talk. He claimed that while he felt sorry for the way I was treated during our childhood, he couldn't help being inherently better than me, which is why he received better treatment. He then suggested that I stop acting so strangely with our parents, as they were only doing what any normal parent would do in their situation. He urged me to help them out since they were in a tough spot and said that I should stop holding grudges like a child. I laughed right in his face, finding it utterly ridiculous how delusional he sounded with his nonsense. I told him that instead of wasting his time trying to belittle me and manipulate me into giving them money, he should focus on finding a job. That certainly hit a sensitive spot as he raised his voice and began accusing me of being envious. He claimed that not only our parents, but even my ex-wife, had always favored him over me. He claimed that my refusal to help them financially was just my way of taking revenge. I didn't even argue with him. I just agreed, telling him that yes, I was taking revenge, and there wasn't much he could do about it. That made him even angrier. And he threatened to come after me, saying he'd force me to hand over the money one way or another and that I'd regret speaking to him like that. Honestly, I'm not taking his threats seriously at all. He can try to intimidate me all he wants, but I know he's not capable of doing anything to me. I'm completely unbothered by it. Update 2. So, my brother paid me another visit a few days ago, attempting to persuade me to assist them once more. Unfortunately for him, his efforts were in vain. My parents had previously attempted, but it didn't work out for them either, so this time my ex chose to reach out and have a conversation with me. I hesitated before answering, but ultimately I chose to pick up the call. Ignoring it would have likely resulted in another visit and further time wasted. So I had a conversation with her, and it was absolutely mind-boggling to witness the level of entitlement and cruelty displayed by these individuals. She began the conversation with a polite introduction, mentioning that she and her family were facing financial difficulties. Although she acknowledged that I had no obligation to assist them given the way they had treated me, she encouraged me to consider the situation and take the high road. She attempted to elicit my sympathy by highlighting the fact that my parents had provided for me throughout my childhood, and that she had also made efforts to be a supportive spouse. She conveniently overlooked the fact that my parents showed little concern for me and consistently favored my brother. And it's worth mentioning that she ultimately betrayed me by getting involved with the very brother I used to express my frustrations about. Well, that was a complete failure. I explained to her that although I sympathized with their situation, I was already incurring significant expenses by providing her with alimony, even though she was not entitled to it due to her infidelity. However, she was able to extract the information from me, as my family had no reservations about deceiving others and manipulating the situation to their advantage. She began crying during the call, accusing me of lacking empathy and being self-centered, which I found quite ironic. Despite my continued refusal to assist, she insisted that my brother's perspective was correct and that she had no alternative but to involve the authorities. She mentioned her intention to request an increase in alimony and take legal action to embarrass me once more. Frankly, I would be interested to witness their attempt. Initially, I was incredibly emotionally exhausted and feeling down, to the point where I didn't have the energy to argue or attempt to prove them incorrect. I reluctantly decided to comply and agreed to make the alimony payments without challenging the validity of their accusations. I never exhibited toxic or controlling behavior, contrary to their claims. Therefore, it is unjustifiable for her to have cheated on me and for her to receive any financial compensation from the divorce. But at that point, I didn't care. All I wanted was to finalize the divorce, no matter how much it cost me financially. This time, however, I'm determined to fight back and teach my family a lesson they won't forget. Update 3. In an unexpected twist, my ex-wife actually followed through on her threat and filed for a higher alimony amount, citing my recent promotion as the reason. But this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it so easily. I reached out to all our mutual friends, explaining the situation in full. Many of them were unaware of the real reason behind our separation. So I filled them in on everything. Their reactions were a mix of shock and anger, and they immediately agreed to testify against my ex-wife if it came to that. I also informed my lawyer that I wanted to put an end to the alimony arrangement altogether since she had no right to it. Over the next few days, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, showing how my parents and brother had always treated me unfairly and were now trying to exploit me for money, knowing about my promotion. I had reached my breaking point and realized that I needed to rid myself of these toxic people once and for all. I wasn't going to waste any time worrying about their feelings. I managed to convince some of my cousins, who had witnessed how I was treated like an outsider in my own home growing up, to testify on my behalf. Even though we were never particularly close, they were kind enough to help. My lawyer was quite impressed with the evidence we had gathered and felt confident that we had a solid case. He even mentioned that we might finally be able to put an end to the alimony payments. It was already known that my ex-spouse had cheated on me, but the story that she and my family had concocted, in which I was portrayed as the villain and my brother was portrayed as the hero who saved her, was completely contrived. I had not fought back the previous time around, But this time I was determined to set the record straight, and I did exactly that. I did not fight back. When I presented the video testimonials from my friends and a couple of relatives, which clearly showed that everything my family had claimed was a lie, they were left speechless. I think they had assumed they could manipulate the situation as they had in the past, but I was no longer the emotionally fragile person they had once known. In fact, everything they had put me through had only made me stronger. So yesterday, it was finalized that I would not have to pay my ex any alimony anymore in light of the new information that had surfaced. I was probably the happiest man on earth when I realized that it was finally over. It was just so satisfying to see the smug look completely wiped off of my family's faces, and my ex looked like she was going to start crying any second now. But, yeah, I couldn't care less about her crying anymore and was just simply done with this whole thing. I thought that I would go home and treat myself to some great takeout and a movie, but my family, of course, had to do anything and everything in their power to stop me from experiencing happiness. I was only a few yards away from my house when I noticed my brother's car parked right outside my home, and I was really confused as to why he would be there. I still went in, and there was my family, standing outside my door and blocking my way in. I was very taken aback and didn't even know what to say, but I decided to act like this didn't bother me and told them to get off my property if they didn't want me to call the police. That's when my dad spoke up and told me that I should be ashamed of myself for what I had done that day. He proceeded to lecture me about my supposed lack of responsibility toward the family and accused me of betraying them by refusing to help when they needed it most. When he finally finished, I decided not to respond or engage in any conversation. I just stood there in silence, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of provoking me into doing something rash or stupid. But I'm not a fool, and their desperate attempts were not going to sway me, which they should have realized by then. My silence likely angered them even more, and despite my mother insisting that I show respect and talk to my dad, I still refused to speak. I could see their frustration growing because they were clearly hoping for a big argument, but I wasn't giving them one. After some more shouting, my brother finally lost his temper and grabbed me by the collar. He tried to hit me, but my dad managed to pull him back just in time, while he yelled at me, calling me a jealous loser who would never amount to anything. Honestly, it was laughable, especially coming from an unemployed guy still living with his parents and begging his brother for money, but I didn't bother saying anything more. I simply told them that they needed to leave or I would actually call the police. Given their financial situation, I suggested they make a run for it within the next 5 minutes. Reluctantly they left, but not before my mother made one last attempt to guilt me into giving them money. It didn't work, and they eventually left. It's been almost a day since that incident and they haven't tried to reach out to me again. I'm really hoping it stays that way.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.